Okay, welcome to Urgent Conversations. I'm super pleased to have Richard Comley, the co-creator of Captain Canuck, with us today. Richard, I know that Captain Canuck's been around since May 1975. I discovered him in the very, very early 80s, and it's just such a pleasure to have you here. Before we start, too, I'm just going to get Colin to do the official intro for you, so I'll pass it over to Colin for that.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. Welcome, everybody. Today, we are honored to welcome a true icon of Canadian creativity, Richard Comley, a visionary artist, writer, and publisher behind the legendary Captain Canuck. Since introducing the hero in 1975, Richard has helped define what it means to tell distinctly Canadian stories in the comic world. Beyond Captain Canuck, his career spans decades of innovation, from independent publishing and design to animation and new media, always championing originality and Canadian identity in the arts. He continues to mentor, collaborate, and expand the Captain Canuck universe for a new generation of fans. Please join us in welcoming a trailblazer whose work has inspired pride, creativity, and resilience across Canada and beyond. Please welcome Richard Comley.
So Richard, I the first thing I want to jump into right away is Colin and I talk a lot about things such as perseverance, overcoming challenges, that type of thing as well. So I really want to talk about what the challenges you were going through, because I'm very cognizant of you basically had times where you had to kind of restart the publishing, keep Captain Canuck going. I also want to get into the threads of I have lived in Winnipeg for quite a bit in the past, so I know that's where you started this, and I want to get into that as well to kind of hit the beat of what it was like to be in Winnipeg and while trying to be in a comic industry that perhaps had a U.S. pull as well. So either thread, whatever would be of your interest, but maybe let's get into the challenges you had when you first started it and how you persevered.
Well, Winnipeg, 1975. I actually, the idea to do this came from Ron Leishman, my friend Ron Leishman, who lives now in Calgary and has a website called toonaday.com, Toon a day.com. It's a lot of fun. And you can get a free cartoon in your email 3 times a week for free by subscribing. But you'll see when you see this website. I met Ron at church, and we used to get together and talk because he was a cartoonist. I worked at that time. I was working as both a graphic designer and I did clothing design. And I started out as a crest designer out of high school. So you got to remember, this is 1968, and no computers, obviously. So I'm sure you're aware of that. So everything was hand drawn, and and then I from there I did some embroidery design and then clothing design, and I kind of thought that that's where I would spend a fair bit of career in that area, and so I wasn't into comic books. It was, I mean, I looked at comic books. I liked comic books. I didn't collect them. I didn't buy them per se, really. But after Ron suggested that there should be a Canadian superhero, and that's it, and right away I said, yeah, why not? And I'm like, why not? And so we talked about that for literally 71 to 73. We talked about it. And it was just talk at that time. Ron wanted to serve a mission for our church. We're Latter-day Saints, and I obviously supported him in that. So he ended up going out to Alberta, northern Alberta, working in the oil field to raise money to support himself. And then so in 73, I got serious about the idea, and I needed to do the research. Printing, production, distribution, which is, you got to remember, 1975, there was there was 4 comic book specialty stores in Canada. One of them happened to be in Winnipeg. So Doug Slippa And so, and Doug, I remember Doug was, um, Doug, well, at the time he was like in his late teens. He was still in high school when he first opened his store in Winnipeg. I discovered it in 74 because that's when I started working on it in later 74. First issue came out, it was actually on the stands in May of 75, dated July, so 1975. So I had lots of challenges. You know, it never really dawned on me to approach Marvel or DC with this idea. I just didn't seem to be worth the effort even in my mind. I knew very little about the whole business. I did send 4 pages to Harlequin Romance publishers, and they were interested. And now the interesting thing about the history of Harlequin is they actually started in Winnipeg in 1949, and in 69 they moved to Toronto. And they're big. They're a big publishing company. Romance. Everybody knows Harlequin romance novels. But they were also publishing a few magazines. And I met with them. Somebody came to Winnipeg. I met with them. They were interested. I would, and of course that it all looked good to me. I at the time I was working as an embroidery and crest designer. That's how I was making a living at that time. I'd also worked as a graphic designer, and of course this is all paste up. This is before computers. And the bookkeeper, the accountant at JD Products, where I work mostly, said, no, 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 don't go with them. And they're like, A, they'll own the rights. B, you'll just be an employee. C, you have to move to Toronto. D, no, 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 and they can fire you anytime. Blah 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 blah. But he said, I'm sure you can get government money to start your own publishing company. So that perked me up, and he said you might have to start it in Churchill. Now, you people know where Churchill, Manitoba is, right?
Yep, yep.
Okay, there's Pol
100%.
yeah, you gotta apparently I've never been there, but if you're going out to lunch, you gotta watch out for polar bears, or
Yep.
you'll be lunch. So,
Wow.
so but and I never did. I mean, I heeded his advice. I didn't go with Harlequin. I never did get any government funding. I went to some meetings, I filled up forms, etc. It never happened. Somehow we thought that they were trying to diversify the economy in Churchill. So that was the
That makes
thinking.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So uh, and the other big challenge was I needed to learn this whole art, the sequential art process, telling stories with words and pictures. And so I started buying comic books and looking at them, and especially superhero comic books,
Yeah.
particularly superhero comic books. There was a store, a used bookstore that sold comics for 5 cents. Now, interestingly, the top part of the cover was torn off those nickel comic books because I learned later on that was because they had been declared returned, unsold. So, anyways, and I'm sure the guy got them free, from the
Oh,
distributor.
for
But
sure. Yeah,
yeah, he
that's
sold for,
that,
mind you, in the early 1970s, a nickel bought you a lot more than it does today. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, I started working on the first issue in late 74, and it was a little bit of a torture, going through the whole process. And I look back at that first issue, it's a you know it's a little rough, and but we got through it, and it got better with each issue, and I kept working at it, and of course George Freeman came along, and with issue number 3, and that was a huge help. George was godsend as far as I was concerned. So was Claude Saint-Aubin. They were both godsend. George Freeman. So the other thing that I did not expect, I mean, you hope for all kinds of things, obviously, but I didn't expect the reception that Captain Canuck got. It was like it was huge as far as the news media was concerned. National news was the first item. Newspaper, pretty well every newspaper in the country did some kind of story on it eventually.
Well,
And a
you've
lot
got the
of
cover of Time magazine, I wanted to say as well at
Yeah,
one
that
point.
was 97. That was quite a bit later. There was a story in a 75 edition of Time magazine. Got to remember that Time in 75 was still it was just a US publication. By 75 there was also a Canadian version of it. And yeah.
So,
So
Richard, what was Canada like at that time when you first came out with it? What was the reception like? What was the mood in Canada for patriotism and stuff like that? How would you
well,
describe it?
okay, so that's all. It's an interesting question because I think a lot of it was almost subconscious. You know what I mean? I really do think Canadians were feeling more like they had their own country, like they were feeling more patriotic, and they were developing pride in being a Canadian. But I think it was subtle, and I think it was more subconscious than anything else. But unbeknownst to me, I was tapping into that. And
Yeah,
it's not like I did some kind of psychological or some kind of research, into on surveys or whatever. No, I don't think anybody did, but maybe they did. I didn't know about it. But I think in that sense, my timing was good.
yeah.
Uh,
And
I
what's
want to get
amazing is
into
that, oh, sorry, Martin. Go
I
ahead.
want to get into the resurgence we saw in terms of with the whole U.S. issue as well. I know you did a cartoon with Captain Canuck and Donald Trump, but there's a
yeah,
couple beats I want to mention as well. I wanted to really say, Richard, comes out right away. I love the way that you thanked your co-creator, gave him a shout out. I think that's also something that we don't always necessarily see, and I'm very appreciative of how you did that. So I think that says. I would say that also helps people stay in a good way, kind of your for a project to carry through because you're acknowledging all those other people. So I really want to give you kudos to that. I've seen you do that in other interviews as well. The one other thread that I want to come back to as well before we hit the beat of kind of the resurgence, as I would call it, the recent one, right? Because I mean, you had a couple. I know you kept carrying on through difficult publishing issues throughout, but I also want to say that it bears talking about your coloring process because you talked about how it was a challenge in the beginning. You were learning as you went, but that, from what I know, that turned into a huge advantage because so I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about that first, maybe in terms of that coloring process becoming very, very unique and something that stood out.
well, I think because I was new. And I was, willing, even felt it necessary to kind of experiment. One of the mistakes that I made is I put way too much effort and way too much time and expense into trying to find advertisers. Of course, I'm going to publish something, and where's my income going to come from? I knew that my income from single copy sales was probably not going to be enough to cover all the costs. Uh, and advertising, sales, um, I saw as essential. So I spent too much time. A lot of my ads turned out to be the same ads that were in many other comic books. What I learned through that process is those ads were all on a what they called a per inquiry basis. So they made money when people responded to those ads and they bought something. You got a
Mhm.
percentage of the sale. So, the ads, um, X-ray vision glasses, of course, that's so standard, like, and
Yeah.
all those goofy items, you know what I mean? And but at the same time, I'm glad that I included them because it it made Captain Canuck sort of culturally, equivalent in some respects to the big guys. I was carrying some of the same ads as Marvel and DC were.
Yeah.
So, but
Well,
anyways,
that's
the coloring.
yeah.
I love
Let
those
me
ads,
talk.
by the way, at the back of the book, all those little toys and trinkets that you were
Yeah,
mentioning. That
and a
was
bunch
fun
of
as a
them
kid.
are our own invention too. You know what I mean? We came up We just
Love
came
that.
up with items that we ran as ads. When it came to the coloring, I did inquire about how who was doing the coloring for the U.S. Comic books. It was actually being done in New Jersey. I remember talking to a fellow in New Jersey, very thick New Jersey accent, by the way, um, and um, and I found out that most of the work was being done by women, literally housewives in New Jersey, who were doing photo masking. In other words, that. In printing, there's four colors. There's four process colors. There's black, magenta, yellow, and cyan blue. And from those four colors, all other colors are derived. So what they would do is when I talk about photo masking is they would um, if you saw negatives, it would be open for a color, and for example, flesh tone was 25% screen of yellow and 25% screen of magenta. So everybody had the same color.
Mm.
Every character looked exactly the same. You know what I mean? And I realized, and yet there was no gradation of tone. It was all flat color with a very limited palette. So, um, and I started experimenting. I actually, and I wish I could remember his name. Um, he was a big help in coming up with this method. So I tried different ways. I tried doing the coloring first over pencils, and then doing black line on fogged acetate over top of that. That wasn't as good as the method that I tried next, and that was do the black line artwork just like all other comic book artists were doing it, basically the same size, then put a clear sheet of acetate over top of that line work, and then you can see the line work, and you're just using the same kind of paint that animators use, which is a vinyl acrylic copolymer paint. And then basically just a brush and you painted it. And so whatever you put in there, you could get gradated tones. You could get any color. You want somebody to have a little more color in their face, and then, some uh, Irish person who's really, really white or something, you know what I mean? You could do that. So the the process, what the separators would do is they would take what they refer to as a line shot of the black line artwork. There's no tones in there. If you wanted any tone in there, you had to put it in mechanically. In other words, with something like lecture set, you know what I mean,
Yep.
screen,
Right.
and the color, the overlay they would separate into the yellow, magenta, and cyan blue, and that's how you got all the colors. And eventually, other publishers wanted used our method. I did coloring for other publishers. George did coloring for other publishers using that same method. And then, of course, Photoshop now and a few other software programs now do all the coloring. That's all the coloring is done in computer nowadays.
I just love the illustration of the fact that your learning curve doing something different turned out to be an advantage because when you look at that art, it really stood out, especially at the time. It was very different. So I remember seeing it again, in my viewpoint, it took a couple years in the early 80s, but it really jumped out at me as something very unique and very different and something that really drew you to it immediately. I do want to get into the resurgence around the time when the 51st state controversy and all of that, because I know you did a comic book around that time. But maybe I'll pass it over to Colin for a question in the meantime, and then let's revisit because I really do want to do that
Okay.
as we go.
Yeah, yeah. My comment was in line with this resurgence and with the the tariffs and the new presidency and whatnot. And it's very timely that with the 50th anniversary this year, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You're seeing this good word resurgence of Canadian patriotism, right? So it's almost like it's come full circle, and in step Captain Canuck again, right? To come and lead us forward with some
Yeah.
victory stories and adventures, right? So I'm really looking forward to see where it's going to go and what Captain Canuck's future looks like, right?
This is
Thank
Oh
you for
wow.
showing us, Richard.
that we have a visual here. So this is the
Yeah,
poster. It started out as a cover, and then
yeah.
it became a poster. So yeah, it's Captain Canuck confronting Mr. Trump.
I,
And
Is he slapping him? Is that what I'm
no,
seeing
no,
there?
no, of course not.
that's I yeah. I was gonna say, Colin, that's one thing I know Richard would probably want to talk about because
Yeah.
it's good that you brought it up that way because I know that one thing that really stood out about Captain Canuck is that he's a more peaceful, if you want to put it that way, superhero, a little less likely to jump into the typical superhero kind of fist solve everything issue. And I
Hmm.
know that Richard communicates that really well. So we should get you talk about that as well in terms of that. I know you again, I've seen, interviews with you. We spoke about it repeatedly where Captain Canuck stands up for Canada, but he tries to use a little bit of logic first before he goes into fisticuffs. So maybe
Yeah.
if I can get you to
Very
comment on
timely.
that.
Well, I wanted, um, I wanted to represent what we consider the ideal Canadian, more polite, less violent, more hospitable, bilingual, maybe. Of course, Captain Canuck is bilingual. The other ingredient I wanted Captain Canuck to have was I felt that he's the Quinn. He's a true Canadian in the sense that he also has some indigenous blood in his veins. I felt that that was another ingredient that would make him more Canadian.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, and I definitely wanted less violent and just a little kind of a different approach, less shooting, less big guns, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, Americans are gun happy. I
Yeah.
mean, I tell that to Americans. I think, oh my goodness, a lot of people own guns, and like big guns, and anyways, down
You
there.
also you also had a character Quebec as well. So you mentioned uh, this idea too. So it was very much trying to, I would say, reflect as much as you could in terms of what was going on in Canada, the different structures. So that's very much appreciated. But the less violent part, I would say, is
Yeah,
something right away that stands out to you. And I'm very appreciative that you did it that way as well. And I think it really reflects the Canadian values, I would say, right? Being a little more maybe not as fast to jump to conclusions, to think about things. So
yeah.
yeah, so that's amazing. Did you get any when you did because I kind of know that you generally had positive feedback from the US, but in terms of even when you did the poster with Trump and Captain Canuck, but did you get any kind of backlash you felt at all or negative vibes during that time?
You mean more recently? So, for example, that cover that I did, Captain Canuck, confronting Trump, and basically he's the pose is he's basically chastising him. He's just being very somewhat confrontational even, and that around just after that I did this one too.
And Elon Musk. Is that
Yeah,
Elon
and
Musk?
Mr. Musk is in there too. Now, interestingly, when I was working on this drawing, um, Reuters came up from Seattle to do a story on the Trump, the Captain Trump cover, and this was on the drawing board, and of course they wanted to get a shot of this too, even while it was still in the pencil stage. But at that time, um, Trump and Musk were buddies. They were so, and this artwork kind of represented Captain Canuck kind of throwing them out of the house. Just imagine they've crossed the border, they're in Canada. Captain says, "No, no, get out of here," and he just throws them out, kind of thing. You know what I mean? But now this kind of also could represent him breaking up a fight between the two of them
I love
because
that.
they're not buddies anymore. You know what I mean? It's like uh, I remember when I was in grade eight, I had a teacher come along. I was fighting with a kid, and she came and grabbed us both and to separate us. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And that's so there's now double meaning to this
Yeah.
particular poster.
Yeah.
I love
Or the
that,
dad
Richard, that
separating the
peacekeeper.
two unruly
Yeah.
siblings.
Well, I think
But
it's very reflective of the peacekeeper
this
Canada
is what we want, though. Let
viewpoint.
me just
So
jump in here. This
yeah,
is what we're kind of hoping will eventually things will look like in the
Yeah.
relatively near future. Back to a more friendly terms with Americans.
I love
So
the
do you do
positive
you,
outlook, Richard. Sorry, Colin. I was just gonna say I love the
yeah,
positive
you go
outlook
ahead.
So I just wanted again to give you kudos to that because I think it really stands out. So when people are watching this, I can't say enough how I really would want to stress that for people to, when they look at Captain Canuck, how it really is a different aspect in terms of just the basic, whether you want to say Marvel, DC, whoever else, just kind of jumping to a fight first. And again, I mean, there might be a few exceptions here and there, but very much starting off with a peaceful approach, and then even ending on that peaceful approach. So I again, much appreciation for that. I just wanted to say that before I pass it back to Colin. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just gonna comment that this has me thinking that you know how they say that The Simpsons predicts the future, right? So that poster you just showed us there just now suggests that yes, the time will come when we're friends again, U.S. and Canada. Do you see Captain Canuck as being uh this character that will suggest and put in the minds of politicians, of parents, of anybody, Canadians and Americans, of how they should change their behavior and almost be like an influencer, right? Towards
Yeah,
peace,
yeah,
diplomacy,
yeah,
and
yeah.
friendship.
Well, I mean, it's been said, and I wasn't the first to say this, that Captain Canuck to Canadians had become a symbol.
Yeah.
Now, a symbol of maybe even defiance against the push that
Yeah.
Trump has put on Canada with threats of annexation,
Mm,
which we all thought was just joking at the beginning, and then we found it wasn't,
mm,
and then we stopped laughing.
yeah.
And then, of course, the tariffs, you know what I mean, which is wreaking havoc, not just in Canada, but in other countries in the world. And so, so I do think that Americans, you talk about what kind of feedback I've got from the state. First of all, I want you to know that 80% of Captain Canuck comic book sales are in the United States. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've got 10 times the population of Canada. I realize
Mm,
that, but it does sell very well in the United States, and there are a lot of American fans. So the the other thing is that Americans, well, we're all aware that there are many Americans are not happy with the current administration. They're not happy with Trump. There's been protests all over the United States, millions of people. I think the last protest, the No Kings protest,
mm.
was like they counted like 7 million Americans went to the street with
Ooh,
signs and chants.
there's
Yeah,
huge.
and
Yeah.
we're talking all the major cities, Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, all of those cities, even smaller cities like Salt Lake City and others, there was huge protests. They're not happy with Trump and what he's doing. And so I got one request from Americans in California. They wanted to use that artwork, Captain Canuck confronting Trump, uh, in for some of their protest signs, and I let them use it. And they kind of blew up the artwork. And one of the signs that I saw said "Hands off Canada." So just another complaint, another issue they wanted to bring up with Trump. For heaven's sakes, leave these guys alone. You know what I mean? And so so Americans kind of also have looked to Captain Canuck as kind of a symbol of Canadian identity, a symbol of Canadian pride, and defiance against encroaching threats like Trump is.
Yeah.
I think it really speaks a lot too, because I remember how you came up with those pictures. It seemed like when I saw in the media, it was very much almost, I mean, I'm sure it took a little time to draw it, but almost right away when things were really heating up about the 51st state. So the point you made about 80% of the publications being done or being purchased in the States, I think that very much speaks to, themes that Colin and I might reflect on and talk about as well, in terms of not being afraid to speak for important issues, and then doing it relatively calmly and then gracefully, but not kind of hiding behind things that might happen. Because again, I just want people to kind of think about the part, 80% of the publications here, but you're still putting up out this comic. I'm sure not being certain what the reaction might be 100%, right? I mean, obviously it worked out well, but that issue. The one thing I want to make sure that we talk about though too, and this is kind of themes that Colin and I talk about quite a bit in terms of perseverance and resilience. When I followed the publication history of Captain Canuck, you kind of restarted it a few times. I mean, there were three different Captain Canucks, but what I really want to get into, if I can get you to talk about that perseverance, where you basically, it stopped being published for a little bit, but you revisited it, and then you revisited it again, and then you even moved into other media in terms of uh, I don't know if that's the right way to call it, Richard. You can correct me, but maybe shorter animation style, kind of a movie aspect, and so on. So if I can get you to talk about that,
Yeah.
maybe the beats that you went through. I know it's covering a lot of years, right? We're talking about,
Yeah.
well, exactly over 50 years, I think, pretty much, but just
It's
those
50.
beats of the
Yeah.
restarts.
Yeah. Well, okay. When I started at the beginning, I got an $8,000 line of credit in early night or late 1974, and so uh, and that's and I had credit with the printer, so that's how I got started. I ran out of money by the time we finished issue number four, but we hadn't printed number four. One of the other mistakes I made is I printed too many copies. So it was all mass market newsstand distribution back then. I printed 200,000 copies. Now, Marvel and DC were printing twice that number and more. Okay, but my distribution went all across Canada. There were 35 regional wholesalers. The national distributor worked with those regional wholesalers, and that's how it got into all the stores all across Canada. And they also dealt with wholesalers, regional wholesalers in border states, New York, Michigan, Ohio, etc. And so that's how it originally got into the States. Michigan historians say it hit shelves in Michigan before the other states, and they take pride in that. As I was told, you know what I mean. So, um, so I ran out of money. Moved to even though sales were good. The first issue especially, they were very good. I had a lot of help. The regional distributors, instead of destroying copies, would ship back the unsold copies to me. And a lot of them were still in really good shape. You know what I mean? I ended up
And Richard,
selling those.
I just wanted to say, just so people know, so sorry if I interrupt you, but this point
Yeah,
is,
no
I think
problem.
needs to be stressed because you already talked about it, how I know that retailers normally rip off the first page, they save money by shipping back the first page. So I'm sorry to interrupt you too, but I just wanted for our viewers to know how unusual that is. In a way, I think that was, I would say, reflecting, supporting you, I would
Yeah,
guess. So sorry, I just wanted to make sure people understood that
yeah.
part.
Yeah, at that time, what they would do is they would rip off the top and to declare that as an unsold copy, which they wouldn't be paying for. And so these distributors, how the system works is they go out with trucks loaded with magazines, they put them all on the shelves. They go back a month or two later, depending on the frequency, and they pull the unsold ones off the shelves and put on a new issue. The
Yeah.
unsold ones go back and they're counted and ripped, etc. So, and what those guys did, now what I did with those unsold copies that were returned to me, I sold pretty well all of them to jobbers. And these were guys who would buy those copies and probably others too, you know what I mean? And I got like 2.5 cents a copy back then. And they would bag them with, they'd put 5 comics in a bag. It would be with Marvel and DC copies. And those would be, you'd find them in discount stores like Woolco, all those discount stores and a lot of them are gone now. Sand store was a chain, Ralph's, but there was a bunch out there. You know what I mean?
Well,
And
Wilco's where I discovered it. So that's pretty much, I have to say, in the 80s, that's
yeah,
where I came across. And so it very much resonates. Really fond memories of Winnipeg right away light up for me.
yeah.
But yeah,
Winnipeg was great to me too. In many respects. Eaton's department store played a part. You know what I mean? I did signings. Of the first signings I did was in Eaton's, and which is where I met my wife, by the way, the Eaton's department store in downtown Winnipeg. So, And of course, they've torn it down and built an arena. So, but
Did she come to ask for an autograph to sign the comic?
what's that? No,
Did,
no, I didn't. No, I was married. So I met her in 73, and we were married in 75. So no, she was helping me in many, many ways. But yeah, no, Winnipeg, I can think of so many people in Winnipeg that were supportive and helpful. I mean, I really kind of felt like the whole city to some uh, degree, were supportive, and then the media, just a whole bunch of people were helpful and supportive and making it work. And but I still ran out of money because and a lot of it, and some of those reasons I ran out of money was because of bad decisions that I made. As an example, printing too many copies. So I did use up those copies. They all made it into stores eventually, but some of them at less than what I paid for the printing of. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, that's a challenge.
yeah.
yeah, and so anyways, we moved to
Yeah,
Alberta,
the
ran the
business
new
aspect is, yeah.
George and Claude went with us to Alberta in August of 1976. We moved to Cardston, Alberta, which is a small town in southern Alberta. You guys have probably never heard of it. My wife and I were married there. There is a temple there, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints temple, and that's why we knew it. I ran a newspaper. Well, we did. The three of us did. We ran a newspaper there for 5 months. I realized we couldn't make enough income from that newspaper to support us all, and we moved up to Calgary in beginning of February 77. And the three of us just found jobs as commercial artists. And I was out of money. I went looking for investors, found investors in 78. And we started up again in 79 out of Calgary. And that's when the what we refer to as the rest of the original series was published between 79 and 80. Thank you, darling. Between 1979 and about a year and a half of publishing. And we got the issues 4 to 14 and the summer special published during that period.
Yeah, I just want to say too, as Evelyn walked in, I want to just acknowledge that getting us onto Zoom at the very beginning that people didn't see, Evelyn was also instrumental in making sure that we meshed. So you already have a very good support network, as we can see from your
Yeah,
nutrition coming in, Richard. So I
Yeah.
just want to say that thank you to your spouse as well. So
yeah.
the theme,
Thank you for mentioning that.
oh, of course.
She's also the mother of 8 children. So she's busy. They're all adult. They're all
Amazing.
adults now. Doesn't mean that we never have to you know help any of them. But
Well, I
You
love
have
the
your
fact that
entire
you stayed in
Justice League there,
Canada.
Richard.
pardon
Yeah,
me.
uh,
I was
Go
saying
ahead
you have
now.
your entire Justice League right in your family.
Yeah. And seven are boys. We only have one girl out of that mix.
I,
There's only
I
one
I
girl.
almost I
Oh,
almost want to say
wow.
Alpha Flight, the Canadian aspect.
Yeah,
We'll throw it in there. Although I mean Alpha Flight too, so I mean still U.S. published. So Captain Canuck, I mean, goes well beyond that. I love the
yeah,
fact that your story continued in different cities in Canada because I know I'm assuming we're talking to you in BC today, right?
yeah,
And then but you've kind of traveled through different cities, but you remained very Canadian as well and kind of persevere in that publishing. And I think that's just really, really amazing. And I want to get your comment too. I mean, now we have maybe I don't want to necessarily pick on a publisher, but maybe Image Comics versus Marvel and DC, and there's more acknowledgement of creator rights. But I really find it fascinating that you were. I really just want to say smart enough to hold on to the rights of it, as opposed to giving it away to a publisher and then becoming work for hire, which is very common. I would say. I mean, you might know better than I do, Richard, but I would say very much I didn't see it kind of go a different way till pretty much maybe the 90s, at least where you see a little bit more of opportunities to work with companies and own your content. And again, I'm just kind of picking a rough spot, but I think that's a uniqueness to it. And did you always have that in mind though, that you wanted to retain the rights, or did you kind of I mean you kind of talked about it, you weren't sure, right?
yeah. No, really, it was the accountant at JD Products. His name doesn't come to me right now. I I don't think he's still alive, but um, he was the one who kind of clued me in on that important aspect of intellectual property. The rights, and I hadn't really been thinking that much about that. I was new to this is all new to me, really. Um, Comic books, storytelling with words and pictures, basically, all the ways in which sequential art is done, what I mean, to tell the story. But so, yeah, I mean, yeah, now, for example, there are a number of publishers, and Lev Leeson is one of them that will publish creator-owned properties, and the creator maintains ownership. I know there Lev Leeson and about at least three or four other publishers that I can think of will do that. A good project comes their way, they like it, they think it could sell. Yeah, you can keep all the rights, and we'll split the profits on when we'll publish it, we'll print it, we'll distribute it, etc. That's the model, and we'll take a percentage of the profits for going risking that. And
Mhm.
so there's more of that. Of course, um, Image was kind of started with that in mind too, of course. You know what I mean? I know Todd McFarlane. He used to come to see me. Him and two other artists in the early 80s. I did another magazine called Star Writer and the Peace Machine. Very brief. It was only two issues. And around that same time, I had Todd McFarlane and two other artists who would come to see me. They were all young guys. They're all 10 years younger than me, and they wanted feedback. They wanted advice about, what their next step should be. And they all wanted advice and input and feedback on their progress,
I,
in their
I
drawing.
love that. I love that tie-in, Richard, because I'll be really frank too. Colin knows that one of the people that I'd really love to interview in the podcast as well was Todd McFarlane. I didn't realize he had that connection, so that's amazing as well. And
Yeah.
more again, from the image aspect, from the Canadian aspect, from having that business sense. Of course, I mean, with all due respect, he's coming in a few years after, you've did the 75 thing with Captain Canuck. So you were in an environment where I would say you were smart enough to listen to the accountant or whoever else, but it was a tougher environment of maybe of learning. Whereas, it's a few years later, but I still love the fact of Canadians having uh, the idea of retaining their creator rights, trying to create something where they can maybe pass it on to whether it's their children, to other people, where they have a little bit of control as to opposed to the work for hire. So yeah, that's a really funny connect, and just in terms of what we were
Yeah.
looking at. I have more questions I can always ask you, because I mean, comic books, I grew up on those. I mean, very inspirational to me in different ways. Captain Canuck goes without saying, but I'm going to pass it over to Colin for a bit for some more questions, so I to get a chance here.
Sure. Uh, the little squirrel in my head is going crazy right now with things I really want to ask you. I'm curious about. Like, I love the tie-ins between, the stigmatism about reading comics as a kid, like, oh, you're wasting time, that you go clean your room. But there's a lot of value building, right? Principles of being a good human, especially with the ideals that Captain Canuck is sharing, right? And
Yeah.
representing. So something I'm curious about, Richard, is that superheroes, they suggest hope, right? And they give us a role model and somebody to be like, right? And some of us, we tend to get sucked into that world and in a way try to be like that person, right? So when you think about the challenges, the adventures, the victories that Captain Canuck is going to have, who comes to mind? Like, and it's a two-part question. So back then, when you first started out creating the scripts, the storylines, and whatnot, who were some of the real people in the background that you thought of when creating these stories and these adventures? And then fast forward to today, who are some of the real people that you think will represent or personify Captain Canuck in today's world, right? Who are
Oh
these
boy.
real people?
Well, okay, so
Is that a loaded one?
yeah, yeah, a little bit. So I think we're all aware that Superman was created by a Canadian and an American. Okay, and Superman is really the origin of the gen of that genre. Okay, superheroes. He is really
Yeah.
the first superhero, really. And also superheroes really follow that same pattern. They're heroic, self-sacrificing, and you know, there to help all mankind, kind of thing. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
really, most of the like Batman and all the others that followed Spider-Man, they're pretty. The formula is pretty much the same. There's obviously some differences, even in the storytelling technique. There's some differences, but it really was Superman that started the whole superhero genre. And it really, I mean, that when I started really reading comic books. Now, I did read comic books as a kid. When I'd go to a neighbor, they would have, well, typically it would be Archie and war comics and now and then and Superman. And so, at an early age, I had read comics. I liked them. And but I was just, I just didn't buy them. I wasn't really into it until I decided I needed to make them, to produce them. And then that's when I really
Yeah.
seriously started looking at them and reading them and kind of dissecting them and analyzing how the way the stories were told and so and did I think of anybody in particular? Not that I can think of. Nobody comes to mind,
Mm.
that I thought, oh boy, that's just like so and so, who happens to be a real person. You know what I mean? Like, now, I mean,
Come on, you
uh,
must have said, what would I do?
yeah, well, yeah, to a certain degree, you have to think that way, even from the criminal's aspect. What's a logical approach here? You know what I mean? I
Correct.
want to
Yeah.
achieve a certain goal, whether it's stealing this or doing that or I mean, what's the smartest way to go about this? And of course, the opposition, the good guy, trying to stop this evil from happening, you would think would have to approach it logically too. Okay, how am I going to stop this guy? How am I going to, get the goods back, kind of thing. So, but no, I can't think of any. Now, you'll notice I am wearing a poppy. I had four uncles who
Yeah.
fought in World War II, for example. And I wish I could show a photo of one of my uncles who fought in the battle, was killed in the Battle of Britain. And like
Mm.
mm, hundreds and hundreds of others, of course, 19-year-old shot down over the channel. I don't know if you're familiar with the Battle of Britain, but it was a crucial battle. If the Germans had have taken out the RAF, because they stopped the invasion of England by the Germans. By the way, my wife is German. Did I mention that?
No, no, no. Well, I know you're also you were born in England as well, so kind of made me think of Superman coming from another planet as well. That theme as well from Joe Shuster doing that, and then
Yeah,
whether you're some people might be born in Canada, some might be coming in from other places, but we have that embrace of people. So I like that thread as well when you mention
yeah.
that, and you do put us to shame with the poppies. I swear to you that I have mine sitting on my desk. Both Cullen and I were scrambling. We should have. The minute I saw yours, I went, you know what? But we were maybe a little too excited to have you on the show. So no, it's not
Well,
a good enough apology, but thank you for
yeah.
having that.
We
No,
A
we'll
big
get
that
shout
you
out.
know, I
it.
get more I get more conscientious about this as I get older. And you might find that too. You know what I mean? When you get older, you start thinking more about things like that. So,
Oh no, for sure. Well, I just did a little volunteer part too with the selling of the poppies, but so I very much appreciate you wearing it. And I do want to say, especially with the 11th coming up, we're on the 10th today, so tomorrow we have Remembrance Day, as people
Post
might
epic
know. Uh,
margin.
So just thank you for doing that as well, Richard. I'm very cognizant of your time, so I am going to pass it over to Colin for maybe one more question. Just want to give out our appreciation. But before we go before I get to your to another question, Colin, do you want to give a shout out to any website or anything to promote the work that you're doing? I don't mind doing that at all.
Okay, well, levgleason.com, L-E-V Gleason, Gleason, .com, or
And
just
we'll put
Captain
that on
Canuck.
there.
Yeah,
We'll put
CaptainCanuck.com
it
is fine
under.
too. Yeah,
We'll put it under. Yeah. Colin, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, yeah, just to close things off a bit, as we have the 50th anniversary about us right now, what are
yeah.
some things you can suggest that we can look forward to? How can we participate? How can we, celebrate this milestone together with you?
Well, okay, let me review again the history. So I started Captain Canuck again in 92, 93, and did 4 issues of Captain Canuck Reborn. Again, basically, I ran out of money. You know what I mean? And some of it was because of mistakes I made, but the other, then it was licensed for the West Coast Captain Canuck. Then I did a
Hmm.
couple of other issues independently. Then I met Fatty Hakim, and which is now Lev Gleason Publishing. Now I really think meeting Fatty was godsend, if we can say that again. You know what I mean? Because he's got more of a business head. He's a smarter businessman than I've ever been. And then for example, he put together the animated web series, which won an award, which is still available online. It's a lot of fun. 5 episodes. They're only 3-minute episodes each, and so you can watch all five in like 15 minutes, kind of thing. They did a great job with it, and from the beginning, which the first issue published by Fatty, and it wasn't Lev Gleason Publishing yet, was that 2014 summer special, which also was sold to libraries and even malls bought it, for example, way back in 2014. 2015 was the beginning of the most recent series. Fatty brought in new talent, and they did. Kalman did a great job. Everybody involved have all done a great job with it. So, a big shout out to all of those guys.
Hmm.
Too many to list right now. Um, but so and Lev Gleason really has Fatty's put a great deal of effort and funding into this resurgence of Captain Canuck since basically 2015. So a big shout out to him for that. And we're going to keep going. The other thing too is next year there's going to be. Can you see this?
Yep, Archie.
Archie, yeah,
Love
Captain
that.
Canuck Archie
awesome.
series. Yeah. So it'll be like a 5 issue series.
Yeah.
And looking forward to that. Fatty's got all kinds of plans for that. We're going to involve many Canadian artists uh, who've already done work on previous issues of Captain Canuck. So it'll be a kind of a celebration of that. So let me talk about the 50th anniversary also.
Yep, please.
I did a tour. Uh, um, I call it a 50th anniversary tour, and I did signings in 12 comic book stores, starting well, basically the last one was actually here in Vancouver area, as part of the tour. The first one was in Calgary, Comic Kazi, and then I went to Moose Jaw, Regina. And I did one in Duluth, Minnesota. It was the only U.S. one, and was very well received there. The media, everybody. I had no idea there were so many fans in Minnesota. So, and
Well,
we were,
80% of sales, right? In the States, 80% of
yeah,
sales. So you gotta,
yeah, yeah. So, what happened was the store owner was friends with a university professor who was a lifelong Captain Canuck fan, and he said, "Oh, please come and speak to my class and speak to the local media, etc." and they covered our motel and covered, food, etc. So it was very pleasant, and we got treated extremely well. And Duluth is an interesting city. I mean, it's different. So, anyways, the tour was good. I've done more comic convention this year than I would normally do, which included Calgary, and Winnipeg was the last one. Um, uh, um, Vancouver was the first one, and Winnipeg was the last one. And of course, the 50th anniversary being marked by my being at the Winnipeg Comic Con certainly made sense to all of us. And it was, I was getting a little tired of the whole thing by that point,
Yeah.
but was happy to be in Winnipeg,
But it's
and we were
full
well
circle.
well treated.
Full
Yeah, it
circle
was
to Winnipeg.
special.
I actually got to see you this year at the Fan Expo, but I didn't get a chance to talk to you because every time I walked by, you were quite busy signing and had a couple people in front of you. But it was lovely to see your presence there as well. The one thing I think I love the way you're always honoring other people and saying how they helped you, including the accountant, including your co-writers, your co-creators. I just wanted to mention that I'm also aware that the first Captain Canuck comic books are actually archived in the Canadian Library. So I think you were so busy giving other people's kudos. I think that also shows the reflection of how much that work has meant. So I just wanted to mention that as well, Richard. So thank you for that. Colin, anything before we let Richard go as well, because I'm very cognizant of his time.
Yeah, no. It has been a true honor having this conversation with you, Richard. I have two boys. One of them is 10 years old. He loves drawing. Over the weekend, he introduced me to Sora. Well, I knew about Sora, but I played along. Oh my God, what is this Sora, right? And we got on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
computer and he just literally typed out this scenario, and it created the image and the video around it, right? And of course, it was this very extravagant thing with like 100 men being beaten up by this King Kong type thing, and throwing somebody away while they say 6-7, right? So it was
yeah.
it spurred some creative juices in his brain. But I'm very, very much looking forward to diving into this series with him, with Caden, to introduce him to Captain Canuck as well, and let him get inspired by some of the ideals that Captain Canuck will share to be a good human, right? And a
Yeah,
good Canadian.
yeah.
So thank you for bringing him to us and for
Oh,
sharing in this
okay,
discussion today.
Colin. So my website is Comely Art, COMELY
Mhm.
art.com. And your son, there's a lot of images on there. I mean, I've done a lot of illustration for children's books and
Yeah,
greeting cards and advertising. In the 50 years, I spent more time doing all that kind of work because I've got a family to feed, and I could
yeah,
only work on a comic book when there was financing available, kind of thing. So, yeah, and I shared with you the times when I did that. In
yeah,
between those times, I was doing whatever I could do. You know what I mean? Children's books and
yeah,
storyboarding and advertising,
yeah,
to pay the bills. So, but that website, there's images there that a 10-year-old will like.
yeah.
Listen,
So,
Definitely
and
that's
will.
true.
there's about 200 images. Those images uh, are being licensed. I've got an agreement with an American licensing agency, and they do what they call bulk licensing. So,
Okay.
it's a cheaper way for publishers to get access to images that they want,
I'll
apparently.
definitely
So,
check it out and
yeah,
share with him your passion for creativity and your perseverance, right? Especially over the years, raising a
yeah.
large family and still sticking to your passion. This is amazing. So thank you, Richard.
Thank